One fellow stopped me a minute ago, and one of us, and he asked if I would speak about aging, because he's working in a nursing home and is interested in tell me if I get it wrong, the greening of aging? The greening of elder care. That's a nice one. I like that. Jai, who besides devotional practices, also manages me. Is that what you are? He's my agent. And he just arranged a contract for me that will give me about a year off to do a book on aging. And it's a book I really, really want to do. I mean, obviously I want to do it for obvious reasons. In the proposal for the book, I told two stories. One was the evening I took a train back from Westport to New York City. That railroad, after a certain hour, you buy your ticket on the train when you go from a little station like Westport. So I got on the train, and I had been out in the autumn leaves with a wonderful friend, and she had just shown me all the secrets and the frogs and the whole business. I was really happy. And the conductor came down the aisle, and he said, "Tickets, please." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'll have to buy my ticket on the train." And he said, "What kind of a ticket do you want?" And I said, "Do I have a choice?" He said, "Regular or senior citizen?" So it was interesting the way I said it. I said, "Senior citizen," which was the same way when I was 18 years old and I could drink legally in New York. I went in and I ordered a beer and the bartender heard the tone of my voice and he asked for my identification. The conductor did not ask for my identification. And I said, "How much is the senior citizen ticket?" And he said, $4.50. And I said, "How much is the regular one?" He said, $7. And I was very pleased. And then as he went away, I started to realize what I had put on, what mantle I had put on with the idea of senior citizenship. It wasn't just an economic category. I mean, it was technically, but it wasn't psychologically. Psychologically, it all had to do with change in status in the society. And as I started to feel the nature of the mantle of being a senior citizen and all my models of senior citizens, I was absolutely overwhelmed with the I don't want to put it so negatively, but the mythic conspiracy we are all a part of that defines aging. And I haven't done the book yet, so I don't know what it's going to say, but I realize that as I become more aware of the way in which the mythic fabric of the culture is defining who I am, like in the determinant of age, that as I become more aware of it, it starts to have less power over me. Just that awareness changes things. Like if you look at television, look at all the people of age and see how they are characterized in all the stories. They're either foolish, irrelevant, sort of bumbly wise. Only Angela Lansbury. Some of you know what I mean. It's Murder, She Wrote. And she's a star from way back. And I just realized as aging older people, in a funny way, get warehoused, either in upper middle class elder communities where they are pleased that no children are allowed. Can you imagine? That's like a hell realm. I don't want children around. They make too much noise. So does life. I mean, when I go into India or I go to, most cultures I go to, you feel the interesting working of the extended family, how it all works, how there are built-in babysitters, and how the grief is spread around, and how the economic people have someplace to fall, and how the whole web, and realize at what cost we have cultivated personal individual freedom, and whether individualism isn't an interesting kind of ism. And the essence of the issue of aging, it seems to me, well, I don't say the essence. I'd say a significant variable is the issue of power, of loss of power. And I started to think about power. I mean, I'm just at the edge of my thinking, so all of this is just one person ranting. But I remember sitting with Maharaji, and we were in Delhi, and he was lying on his tucket, his cot, blanket fallen off him. He doesn't have anything, he doesn't do anything. He's just there. Extraordinary, extraordinary being. And in the distance, we hear a huge parade going by, which has in it Indira Gandhi and her generals, and there are elephants and tanks. Major parade. Maharaji's lying there, and he says, look at all that, and it's just a worldly king. It's just a worldly king. And it was interesting how I got a flick of consciousness about planes of consciousness and power. I mean, when I look at levels of power, there is no doubt in my experience of consciousness that there are planes of consciousness where an individual is connected to the universe subjectively, and therefore, as that individual thinks, so that all manifests. And that can include other people's minds and other places and all of it. I think there are individuals who can change external reality, what we would call external reality, because it isn't external for them. When Maharaji told me, as I've written about in ad nauseum, when Maharaji told me about how my mother died in Boston, and there was no way he could know that. No way. There was nobody that I was with that knew it. There was no plan that he was going to meet me. There was no hidden files. There was no ticker tape. There was nothing. And he told me that she died, how she died, and then, although he only spoke Hindi, in perfect English, he said, spleen. And spleen was the organ from which my mother died. The removal of her spleen. And I remember knowing at that moment when my mind gave up, because you've got to put, a kind of a Harvard professor mind in the presence of that phenomenon and try to bring those two things together. And there's a moment where my mind, which I feel like the rational mind has so much power. Look at technology, look at science, and I'm trained in that stuff. And look at all of the extrapolations outward, going to the moon, the medical science, all of it. Look at that's all the power of the prefrontal lobe mind. It's like the siddhis, they call them spiritually. It's the powers of the. It's like the power. The first power was his prehensile strength, and now you have the power of this thing. It's incredible. But I saw that in the presence of his awareness, that power was trivial. That was trivial. It was a nice and interesting power, but it was not the essence of the matter. It was an instrument, as Vivekananda, I guess, said, or Ramakrishna. The mind is a beautiful servant and a lousy master. I received an invitation to speak at Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills. And I. Magnans and Neiman Marcus in Beverly Hills. And one more that I forget. And for which I was asked to speak for 15 minutes each place, which was like an hour, for $12,000. Okay, now some of you know what that means. Now, the people that invited me were La Prairie Cosmetics. La Prairie makes creams to protect you from aging. Okay? They also have a sanitarium, a place in Switzerland where you can go and have chemicals.
A spa.
You can a spa? No, they call it a sanitarium there. Where you go and you get injected and dejected and sucked off and reconstituted.
It's good the check is cleared already, that's all.
Now, many of my friends who are do-gooders, the whole lot, they didn't think I should do this because it represented that I would be supporting something I didn't really value. I didn't really agree with that because I think that that aging is a process that goes on in nature, and we're part of it, and the fact that we don't see aging as beautiful is a problem we should work with instead of recreating the world to make believe it doesn't exist. And I don't think it makes people that happy. Because the first job you have, you're worried about when you'll need the second job, and is it falling, and etc. I'm talking about face adjustments. I have no moral thing about that. I just think it's sad. So most of my friends thought I shouldn't do it, but $12,000. I mean, if you were to look at it from the point of view of the Seva Foundation, of which Jai has just retired as chairman of the board, see all the roles, see all the hats he wears? I mean, I get to wear one hat, but he wears all these hats. If you translate that into eyeballs, at, say, $50 it takes, doesn't, but let's say it took $50 to take a blind person and give them an interocular lens so they have perfect vision, because they have a cataract. $50 into 12,000. Think of all those human beings. I thought, the hell with it. I will lecture anywhere. And it's just, I'll say the truth. That's a simple contract. That's not really a contract with the devil. It's sort of, I come out of a family of lawyers, and so you gotta figure out how to. So we were sitting at the luncheon at Saks. You have something to say? That turned out to be the only one I did, for which they paid $12,000. So it was 15 minutes for $12,000. That's a good agent. So we were sitting at the table, these little tables. There were little tables of 8 or 10, at which at each one there was a La Prairie representative helping people understand how they should do this stuff. And It was the 200 best customers of Saks. And it was a luncheon. And I was speaking right after the skin nutritionist. And she said she wanted everybody to do this experiment. Take your skin and you squeeze it, and you hold it for 5 seconds, and then you let it go, and you see how quickly it goes back, and that's how vital your skin is. So we all stuck our hands in the middle of the table, and we did this thing. 5 seconds. And then we all let go. And mine didn't go back at all. In fact, if I didn't push it down now, it would still be there. And they were horrified. I mean, they were honestly horrified. It was just like it was some major social gaffe. And they sent me a big box of skin cream after that. A care package. But I saw how deeply pervasive a definition of aging as something to be warded off or something not to be enjoyed. Not to be enjoyed. Imagine that. A whole section of your life not to be enjoyed. Either because you're afraid of death or because you're caught in a dysfunctional mythology. Because we've lost the elders in the society, and the elder wisdom is just what we need at this point, whether it comes from elders in indigenous societies or elders in any society. But the elders have derogated their responsibility. They don't think of themselves as elders. I'm no elder. I've been carrying on a dialogue with a fellow who writes lecture speeches in the White House for Bill Clinton. Very, very nice guy, David Dreyer. And I said, David, is there any space in the White House? Is there any silence? Is there any non-reactivity? Is there anybody that isn't in a power role there of some sort that merely holds the vision or is just present as a disinterested counselor, if you would? It's what kings always had when they had elders. And he said, oh no, there's nothing like that. And you can feel the pain of politics where everybody's busy reacting to everybody else and nobody is reflectively responsive. Now, when you get older, one of the things that happens is the change of time, the change of the meaning of time, in a whole raft of ways. First of all, time gets short before you're going to leave your body. And not only that, but that agitation and there's a whole chemical thing in it, makes you experience that time is moving by faster. It seems like, because when you're a child, spring is a big thing and summer is summer. And then, I mean, you know, the feelings of each season, and autumn is going back to school. And at least it was in my day. And for adults, it runs a pace. We seem not to have enough time for anything. And then we get older, the years go by very quickly. So that's one dimension of time. Then there's another interesting dimension of time. Like when I say to my friends, how old do you experience yourself as being? Not how old are you chronologically, not how old is your body, but how old do you experience yourself as being? There are different kinds of responses. People like me would say no age at all. I don't experience myself as age. I'm just here. And then this body has an age, so is my car. I have two 20-year-old cars and a 63-year-old body. But many people, like Judith in New York says, I have always felt like I was 14 years old. I've always felt like I was like a little girl up in a tree. And I think that for the first 35, 40 years of my life, I felt like I was a precocious child. I was a child who was living in over my head. This may be alien to all of you, but bear with me. It's just my pathology. And then I began to feel like I had gotten through puberty. I was about 40. Just in time for menopause. Now, I started to experience this change in my psychological age. There were a lot of things that occurred in those years, of course, and I got up to the point where I started to feel that I was just who I was. I mean, that I was this age, 63, or at that time 50, 55, and it felt fine. It was comfortable. And then I went deeper and I started to feel no age. Now, if you're in no age, there's no time. Nothing's happening. And that's the nature of awareness. Nothing's happening. No one's going anywhere. There was no birth. There's no death. It all just is, and that's part of you. And as you accept your own legacy, your own lineage, you begin to rest in that component in which there is just awareness and there is no time. There's nothing personal about it. It's not my awareness, it's just awareness. And I started to see the way in which, since the baby boomers are going to start to be 50 in 1996, I'll write the book for them. I'll write the book for, okay, you finish 50 years, who knows what you got left? You could have 26.8 or something on the curve, but you could also have 40 or 1 minute or who knows. So, but it's going to be different. What do you say? Let's reflect about it together. Let's use it as consciously as we've used everything else in our life. Let's make it an exercise. How to live out and honor aging without getting lost in the drama. I mean, why do you have to be, I'm old? How do you do? I'm Richard. How do you do? I'm old. Because I've certainly met people with illnesses that are profound illnesses who are honoring and caring for their body as best they can with whatever wisdom they have. But they aren't lost in the storyline. The fact that they have an illness hasn't redefined their reality. They are not ill, they are a person with an illness. And you take any of your pathology and how quick you are to define yourself in terms of the pathology. And in our society, aging is a pathology. It's a failure. There's something wrong. We don't really want to see you because you don't awaken our sexual interests, you don't have any power, you're our future that we're afraid of, so we'll send you to beautiful places where you'll be happy. This feels like Brave New World. It feels like Brave New World. And we then will cast it through the media as happy faces in Modern Maturity magazine. I am so happy living in this senior citizen community. They all show beautiful dentures. Forced by the lobby for denture makers. Oh God, it's so macabre. You can't help but laugh. I mean, we've all been had so incredibly. So I thought I'd write a book about that. But I've been thinking about power, and Maharaji saying it's only a worldly king. It seems to me that you and I are in a training program that's even, I'll give you another, just a metaphor. This is all a metaphor. Assume it's a total lie. It's just a metaphor. That you and I are part of the segment of civilization. We are not exclusively, we're just a part of it, a tiny part of it, that is developing increasing awareness in a pretty largely unconscious system, which is, the unconsciousness of our living in ways that are destroying our chances of continuing to live. That's pretty unconscious. And we're doing it left and right, every one of us, every day, all the time. You talk about denial. We are all in it right up to here. Right up to here. And I see the system when I have a great statistic. This was a study done in high schools, urban junior high schools. It was a study done of teachers in 1940, and the study was repeated in 1990 with a sample of teachers from the same schools. You might have seen this. I think it was in the New York Times, I'm not sure. Teachers list biggest school problems was the headline. The list in 1940 was talking out of turn, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, getting out of turn in line, wearing improper clothing, not putting trash in the wastebaskets. The list in 1990, biggest school problems: drug and alcohol abuse, pregnancy, rape, robbery, assault, suicide. That took 50 years. Now just let the implications of that sink in for a second. It's easy to get freaked and say, isn't this horrible? But just for an experiment, let's just look at it. It's new. Certainly a more intense climate. I can do one of those lists and comparisons for practically every dimension of our life. The amount of resources left, the rate at which the fish are getting contaminated, the radioactivity that is entering the system of the planet through nuclear waste, increased numbers of homeless people, people who have fallen through the cracks of the social system. On and on. And what I experience is that the rate, and the rate is exacerbated by the technology of our lives. The rate of the ethical, social, philosophical shifts that are occurring. Just that you and I have lived through the coming down of the Berlin Wall and the break of the Soviet Union and the break of another ism. We haven't gotten through capitalism yet, but we're through communism. Because life isn't isms, it's humans. But I would feel that you and I, in the remainder of our lives, face some profound changes. We face the potential of coming very close to chaos. Because you just take the difference between the rich and the poor, which is one of the major destabilizing influences in a society, or north and south in the world scene. There was a time just a couple of generations ago where if the head of a company made 5 times what the lowest employee made. Everybody was comfortable. Now CEOs, 95 times what the lowest person is making. Now, I know they work hard, but that is ridiculous. It's just what happened in the 80s. It was the way in which individualism, out of balance, without a sense of identity within groups, within community, with this wonderful prefrontal lobe, runs amok. It runs amok. Not only aren't we concerned any longer about the 7th generation, we are basically using up the resources of the children and the grandchildren at this moment. Now, all this is the way it is, by the way. I'm not just giving an interpretation. I can give you the data for all these things I've said. None of this is surprising to any of you. If you've spent your whole life, as many of you have, creating a secure situation, that word secure is in jeopardy. I've just been reading, because I've been in Israel, I've been reading books about the Holocaust and how the Jews in Poland, in this case, were sitting in their home with all of their beautiful, sentimental surroundings. And there was a siren and an announcement going through the square. All the Jews have 1 hour to take whatever they can and leave their homes and meet in the town square. And anybody that malingers will be shot. How stable was their lives? How stable is anybody's life? Assuming things, as that stability is threatened, what happens when we were talking yesterday about fundamentalism, as that stability is threatened, people contract. If they have a vested interest in things staying the way they were in President Reagan's American dream in the 40s. If you've got an investment in that and then it all starts to change and you can't quite stop it and your team can't stop it, you contract. And when you contract, your heart closes, you go up into your mind, and when you get into your mind, you cause a lot of trouble. Because the mind, in the service of fear, the quality of the thinking mind is it thinks about things, so it sees everything as an object. So all people become them. And they must be dealt with in order to protect you. I think one of the most powerful images I ever read, since I guess I'm on this track now, was in Elie Wiesel's book, Night, in which he describes a moment in the concentration camp where his father is just weak and about to die, and his father has a crust of bread. And he has been so loving and devoted to his father, and at that moment, he has a thought of, if he die, I get the crust of bread. And it so shattered his belief in his God, his spirit, his whatever, that it colored everything for the rest of his life, because he couldn't handle what he considered the deepest evil that he would have had that thought inside of himself. But that's in human beings. We have seen in our day greed that has been so insensitive to the suffering it's causing. And in part, we are party to it. We are party to it, just the way we live our lives. And it's extremely interesting to anticipate that this is not a stable situation, that it's going to change. And the way it's going to change, if you have a vested interest in holding it the same, you're going to be pushing against the change, because the change is going to represent a threat to your existence. And I would say you and I are in training to find a place in ourselves and in the way we live our lives where we are not so dependent on the forms of existence that we freak when it changes, that we freak in the presence even of increasing chaos. Because it's going to be at that moment where those people who have some tiny degree of equanimity will be that thing around which can coalesce a shift that is healing instead of ultimately destructive. I mean, I think that society still thinks it will solve. It's been holding on to the model of progress for many years, which means science, technology, that we will solve everything with our minds. And I don't think that's the case. I do not think that's the case. And the predicament is when we say, well, there is the need for spirit, it immediately turns in the need for religion, and we just have a new power struggle. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about bringing Christianity into the schools. I wouldn't mind bringing Christ in, but I sure as hell don't want Christianity. Did I alienate you all? All the Christians leaving. See, it seems to me the reason I'm playing this game, I mean, the way I'm thinking these at this moment, and the fun of playing with all this with you, is that aging and the social, economic, political system are facing us with the same thing, which are change. And in addition, loss of power. Loss of power. Because your power base gets threatened. A revolution shakes the hell out of your power base. It really does. And that image I have is still strong in my head. I'm in a village in Guatemala, and all the men have been murdered by the army, which is in the service of the wealthy, and that is backed by the United States, of course. And these Mayan Indians, these men have been murdered, and the women are there with their babies, and they're, in a way, huddling within their villages, waiting for the army in the service of the wealthy to come back and do them in. If they should even murmur the fact that they would like enough land to till to be able to survive. And from there that year, I flew to Beverly Hills, flew to Hollywood, Los Angeles. And I ended up in Brentwood, very, very luxurious suburb. It's all suburb, I mean, it's all in Los Angeles. And I drove down a street in which there were just high walls and television monitors at electronic gates. A street in which there were no humans. There were just walled buildings and gates. And there were little strips of lawn in front, about 5 feet wide. And on each lawn, all the way down, was a sign stuck in black and red, and it said, "Armed Response." And the image was of all the rich people hiding behind the walls, waiting for the next Los Angeles riot, when that sign isn't going to do it. It's not going to do it. Interesting moment. I mean, interesting moment, even if it's just my fantasy, that part, just interesting moment to play with, to not rush into denial so fast. And you and I have the opportunity to get in line with a different kind of power. So that as worldly power changes, you don't get completely lost. You don't get completely freaked. You don't feel like you are threatened. Now, there's another dimension that's sort of in here. It's got to be played in. When you as an individual feel very threatened, one of the things you do is you align yourself with groups because you feel power through, like you feel power through the church, or you feel power through a lobby that's powerful. You feel power through identifying with a country, like we're Americans. What that represents is my passport. That kind of power. I mean, when the Jews faced the Holocaust, which made the individual life so utterly at the whim of a dark force, what the people did as the millions of them were destroyed was they increased their identification with the group rather than with the individual, because the individual was so vulnerable. At least the group which was so vulnerable was less vulnerable. You can feel in the newspapers when you read an article that starts to show that the United States is less powerful. It doesn't have the power to play out its dream. It's like the British Empire being brought to its knees by Gandhi and his salt. I mean, the sun never set on the British Empire. It was everywhere, all around the world. And Gandhi said there's going to be change and the English are going to have to leave, but it's important that they leave as friends. It's important that whatever changes go down, there be the optimum amount of compassion. And for that compassion to exist in your and my hearts, we have to be able to deal with uncertainty, change, chaos, loss of power without immobilizing fear, or without the depth of the fear that makes us go into massive denial and massive violence to other human beings. So I would say you and I are in training. And it's not quite as idle a training as one might like it if one says, well, we have infinite reincarnations. It is true on the spiritual level that if this earth goes under because of radioactivity, you just wait 275,000 years, and then at some point, some amoeba will fly in from somewhere else, and the whole game will start again, and in a couple of billion years here we'll be again. And out there's no time, so what difference does it make? It's just a blink of an eye anyway. That's the world of India, which lives with the yugas and the kalpas of time. And after all of the 4 seasons, the Sat Yuga, the Dwat Yuga, the Tret Yuga, the Kali Yuga, or the Tret Dwat, then Shiva, who's been sitting in meditation, creating the whole universe out of his mind, stands up and dances the pralaya, and the whole thing dissolves in one huge mushroom blast back into itself, into the formless, and then he sits down and creates it all again. You can jump to that level of time. I do it often, because that's also true. The truth is, whether we solve the problems of environment, violence, breakdown of social structures in a harmonious or disharmonious way, at one level is just a curious phenomenon. From yugas and kalpas and reincarnation and other time dimensions, it's hardly a flick of an eye. But you and I also are on Earth at this moment in bodies and have a curriculum. And that curriculum has to do with doing, as our hearts dictate, doing what we can to relieve suffering. And ultimately, what we can do to relieve suffering is be that which is able to be in the presence of suffering without creating more suffering. It's like learning to keep your eyes open in hell. Just looking at just what is and not going under into, oh my God, oh, I wish it hadn't, oh. To the extent you hold a model of how it used to be or how you wish it were that prevents you from seeing what is, better luck next life. Because you're in for a lot of suffering. Because the suffering is the clinging of the mind, the not looking at what is. And out of what is, what do you say? There was this beautiful saint in India, in the mountains, who died, I think, early 1900s. And he was a great, wise being of vast vision and power, a lot of siddhis of power. And he said, it was, if he was in reverie, he said, there'll come a time when you'll walk 5 miles and you'll see a firelight and you'll be so happy to know another human being exists. See, that's such a tasty image to work with for consciousness. For a personality, it's a drag. Oh my God, that sounds terrible. Oh God, well, at least I won't be around. Oh, but gee, oh God, that means, ugh. That's personality. That's a psychodynamic entity, suffering like hell, holding on to who I am. But that isn't who you are, fortunately, so you can relax. It's who you're manifesting as, but who you are is just no time, no space, no birth, no death, no coming, no going. No form. Nothing to do. All just phenomena occurring. Life, death, change, chaos. Here comes death. Again. You talk about the Peace Corps. That's what this is. We're talking about real training for a real Peace Corps. As I said yesterday, the Dalai Lama, who can say, I'm not angry with the Chinese because it isn't functional. It's Stephen's forgiveness. It's all that stuff. It's letting go. It's letting go. It's letting go. Here we are. It's letting go and listening to the deeper powers of the universe. It turns out that in our relation to the earth, we aren't the masters of the game like we thought we were. We're just part of the system. That's a major change. I grew up in being taught in science that we could manipulate the physical universe in such a way to make us happy. And I never remember the discussion of what it would do to the physical universe. You try getting away with a course like that in school now? Don't be silly. Everybody's just beginning to reckon. I mean, I'm part of an organization called the Social Venture Network, which is a group of businesses. It's got Ben and Jerry in it, and Levi Strauss, and the Roddick's from the Body Shop, and all those kind of people, the Calvert Fund. And it's a group of people that get together to see how socially and environmentally responsible business can be. And they start to ask of themselves audits of their environmental usage. And then they demand of themselves an audit of their effect in the communities they're functioning in socially, and for their employees. We're just beginning. This is like a leading edge kind of an organization. We're just beginning to recognize the relation to nature, which is not human over nature. Florence Kluckhohn had these 3 categories, an anthropologist: human over nature, human in nature, human under nature. The nature gods that did us in all the time, that was human under nature. And science has been human over nature, and the Enlightenment ever since the 17th. In Brave New World, their mantra is, because they have built a society that was rooted in Henry Ford's philosophy. And their mantra is, Ford's in his flivver and all's well with the world, in which humans have been turned into happy consumers and producers. So that if the chaos doesn't get you, the organization will. That's what's such fun. There's no way to escape. And here we are. And it's all joyful. Try that one on. You laughing? Have you got a true guffaw in there for all this? As Wavy Gravy says, if you don't have a sense of humor, it just isn't funny. Some of you say, how can you laugh at a time like this? I was just feeling terrible about this. Milk it as long as you want. It's not going to make it any better for you just sitting around feeling terrible. That's a cheap high. Oh, I can't bear it. It's so terrible. Well, we'll wait. Because you got to bear it. You don't have any choice. So you're going to bear the unbearable before you're done. Either your own death or somebody you love or the whole system. It's very interesting to try to be conscious, isn't it? It's more fun than not being conscious, I'll tell you. But it takes a while to figure that out. It isn't as trippy. It isn't as trippy. Wow! And instead of, and that too, and that too, and that too, and here we are. Whew. Pretty heavy. Any adjective is just a joke. Heavy, light. You and I are in training to be free. We're in training to be so present, so spacious, so embracing into ourselves, not looking away, not denial, not closing our hearts because we can't bear it. The statement, I can't bear it, that's what burns you out in social action. The being in presence of suffering and contracting. The contraction starves you to death. When you close your heart down to protect yourself from the suffering, you can't stand it. Because what happens is you close off the being fed by the life situation. Because if you can stay open, the suffering and the joys and the stuff of life, all of it, it's like living spirit, and it just connects to your living spirit, and there's a tremendous feeding going on. You go to funerals, and the grief, real grief, brings people so close together, and it gives them life experience where often they've been deadened into their minds and into their closed hearts. That's why trauma is so profound. It cuts through. A frightened person contracts. When they contract, they go into their minds. When their minds contract, they can't risk. It's a low-risk strategy, so it's reiterating what they know in order to feel safe. And that judges everybody else as a threat to their safety if the fear is great enough. And everybody's them, and you're isolated, and you're very hungry. It's very lonely being that isolated. And the isolation has nothing to do with the social reality. It has to do with your own mind. And once you see all this, what else is there to do but keep working on becoming conscious? No big deal. Nobody's asking you for anything. You'd be a fool not to do it. You'd be a fool. It's just like you're going to perpetuate your own misery and suffering and everybody else's if you don't. So 1 year. 1 year. Make it clear what I'm asking. 1 year for you to be able to live in two planes of consciousness simultaneously. I'll settle for any two. Because the minute you've got any two, the whole thing's happened. Then you see, why those two? And the other thing is, do it joyfully. Do it joyfully. I mean, when you meet somebody that's suffering, What do you have to offer them? You could offer them your empathy. Oh, God, I just can't imagine how bad that suffering must be. That's a good thing to offer, because they feel somebody else is listening to them. The other thing you can offer them is your joy, is your presence, is you're not getting caught in it all. That combination of being empathetic means you're caught, means your heart is breaking because you understand the intensity of their experience. And at the same moment, you are absolutely, equanimously present, not clinging to anything, just watching the phenomena of the universe change. Then your acts are compassionate. That is where the root of compassion is. The root of compassion is not empathy. That's kindness, and that's good. It's great. But it is not the ultimate compassion. The ultimate compassion is the act which has the potential to relieve every level of suffering. Not just the food in the belly or the mattress for the night. It relieves the suffering that comes from separateness. And the suffering that comes from separateness is only when you are present with another person, not when you are separately present. So the whole game of helping another human being, if you're busy being the helper, you make them the helpee, and you've just created suffering. Isn't that bizarre? With the very act of helping somebody. And then you jump out of that one and it's, who's helping anyway? What the hell? It's just, enough, Joy. It just seems that we touch moments where we feel deeply connected. Then a moment later, it's a new moment. And we want to cling to the experience. I invite you not to cling. I invite you to open to the next moment and let it have its own richness. There is a real problem when you have got a weekend as rich and thick as this one has been for all of us, to not try to hold on to the glow. Nothing will kill it faster than clinging. So we're going to do a final thing together, and afterwards we're going to go out into the universe. And suddenly we'll be in cars, on roads, in homes, cooking suppers, doing laundry, answering telephone calls, being charming, looking at television, reading the papers, responding to the calls of help around us, fighting with people. It's such a rich diet that faces us. How couldn't you be ecstatic at the opportunity? I invite you to look at your life just that way, as a most remarkable curriculum. When I was with Aldous Huxley years ago, I didn't know him well, but when we were together, there were just a few words he kept using. One was extraordinary. Another was, how curious. Another was, how odd. And I realized that everything in life is extraordinary if I just want to look. It's true, there's nothing new under the sun, and it's all fresh. I know there are many questions that are unanswered. And I can tell you that if you were to quiet your mind down, you would know exactly what the answer is as well as anybody else would. And if you still don't trust yourself, find anybody else and ask them the question. Because everybody is the goddess in drag. And if they say, oh, I don't know, say, well, look and find out. Because we have to help each other recognize who we truly are. Because we've had such a bum rap for so long. We have mea culpa'd our way through life. Poor schnook that I am. If only I could awaken and taste the beauty of the universe. Enough already. We are so busy not being awakened. It's a real addiction. We are abused. We've been closed down. But being mindful of it, it all dissolves before our very eye. What was the whole journey about? Whatever sufferings you're dealing with, whatever fears or anxieties, don't deny them. Don't get lost in them. Denial, invest them. Just go on, allowing them to continually be grist for the mill of your awakening.